Let's kickstart with our first session. I think let's start with a thought-provoking question. How do you really measure success? Is volume a measure or should it be value? Well, our first speaker of the day is someone who has dedicated more than 17 years of his life. Yes, you heard that right. Just to humanize the workplace leveraging Scrum. He has published 2 of the best-selling books on Scrum and has closely collaborated with none other than Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum. Please join me to welcome Gunther Verheyen. Over to you, Gunther.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashika and Megan, and the whole organizing team for having me again this year. So really grateful to be here. So thank you very much. And indeed, Ashika, I'd like to talk about value, which is, I believe, very important, and it's part of sort of the overarching theme that I've been talking about for at least the past couple of years, which I call moving your Scrum downfield, which means as a global community of Scrum practitioners, we should be moving Scrum downfield ourselves as a movement. And one important aspect of that is understanding that why are we doing this? And that is moving a lot our way of thinking from a volume-oriented thinking towards a value-oriented thinking, and that has a huge impact. But it's in one of the books that Hashika you referred to, what I call part of moving from the industrial paradigm to the agile paradigm. And that's part of it and really important. But first of all, I want to thank people for being here. Thank you very much. I've heard there's also a number of recurring people, so people coming back, people that have attended several sessions in the past, so that's really cool. I'm also a little bit scared of taking a picture of everybody before my session and after my session, because you might just count the number of people that I've sort of pushed away from the event. Got more people before than after my event, so that sort of scares the hell out of me. But we'll see what happens. I can only work really hard to get something out there. So talking about value, and not just value in general, but just value, period, end of discussion. And thanks Hashika for the very warm introduction. So we are now 2023. Imagine only a couple of months to go, and then I'll be sort of celebrating 20 years of Scrum. I started with this whole crazy thing long time ago, around September, October 2003. So in a couple of months, I'll be sort of celebrating 2 decades of an agile way of working. Imagine. People I've been following around, have maybe attended or seen multiple sessions of mine, know that this is very important for me. It's a little thing I have in my home office here. I live in Belgium, in Antwerp, and it says life isn't about finding yourself, it's about creating yourself. And that's very important for me. It's been something that I recognize from my life a lot. Like Ashika said, I call myself an independent Scrum caretaker on a journey of humanizing the workplace with Scrum, which is also connected to that idea of moving your Scrum downfield, restoring the balance between the process aspect of Scrum and the people aspect of Scrum, where the process aspect is still seen and implemented as way too important, and people ignoring the people aspect, the human aspect of Scrum. So, and I've got this little box saying life isn't about finding yourself. And that also applies not just to my personal life and my professional life, but I believe it also applies to Scrum. And I've sort of translated it into what I mean with Scrum. By the way, that quote about life is from a famous American novelist, George Bernard Shaw. But in the world of Scrum, I would translate it as Scrum isn't about waiting for it. It isn't about waiting or finding it. So it doesn't make sense to just sit around and wait. Scrum is about shaping it yourself. Scrum is an open framework. You have to implement it. You have to find tactics to play the game. You have to make it your own appearance, give it your own appearance of Scrum. So don't sit around waiting. Scrum isn't something that is just magically going to happen. It requires effort, it requires discipline, it requires belief, it requires persistence. So take matters into your own hands. That applies to life, but also to Scrum as far as I'm concerned. But talking about the purpose of Scrum. Long time ago, so in those 20 years of Scrum, 10 years ago, just by coincidence, sort of halfway through my career, between brackets, whatever you would call it, of Scrum. So 10 years ago, I made a sort of fascinating move, or I went for some opportunity that arose accidentally, and that was like Ashika said, to go work at Scrum.org with Ken Schrader. I was still working in Belgium, in Antwerp, where I'm still working and living today. Although Scrum.org is based in Boston, Massachusetts, somewhere on the, for me at least, on the other side of the ocean, we still managed to do that. And what I started working on with Ken as one of the first things we did at Scrum.org 10 years ago was to build some sort of guidance in the Gunther framework to help people go through whatever people would call an agile transformation. And we agreed quickly, Ken and I, that you know what, going through an agile transformation based upon Scrum and implementing and introducing, adopting Scrum should have some sort of higher up purpose. You have to have some sort of why in place. And actually the why should not be Scrum itself. In that sense, don't do Scrum because of Scrum. Also, don't do Scrum because everybody else is doing Scrum. So, but that was sort of captured in the idea later on. Scrum cannot be the purpose of Scrum. You can do perfect Scrum, follow the process all the way through, whatever, within the time boxes and all the events in place, and that still is not a guarantee that you will be successful. So don't do Scrum because of Scrum. So let's take a step back then and go back to at least my little definition of Scrum, where I call Scrum, besides what the dictionary says, an empirical framework that enables people, or to enable people, to derive value from complex challenges. There are, for me, 4 very important aspects in that. First of all, the empiricism of Scrum. Very important, that serves to tackle complexity and uncertainty and unpredictable challenges. It will help us be adaptive and change our mind and review whatever we are doing. That's the idea of empiricism. That's one aspect of what I call Scrum's DNA. The other aspect is people. Again, that humanizing the workplace of Scrum. Self-organization, very important aspect of Scrum. But there's also a little thing about the purpose of Scrum. And the purpose of Scrum is to tackle complex challenges and derive value from it. And that is important. That is about the purpose of Scrum. This aligns a lot with the definition of Scrum, by the way, according to the Scrum Guide. And just as you know, you can see by my beard, and I've been about to celebrate 2 decades of Scrum. A lot of these things are in a way not new. We've been saying this over and over and over and over again. It's already even embedded in the first principle of the Agile Manifesto. Our highest priority in the end is to provide our users and consumers with valuable work, valuable, they call it software, you could call it valuable product. So value was already in the Agile Manifesto. It was always in Scrum. And I remember in 2011 joining a beta class of a class that we have at Scrum.org called PSPO, so Professional Scrum Product Owner class. That was in Amsterdam, so I live in Belgium in Antwerp, but a lot of my work has been in the Netherlands, certainly by that period. And you see a very pixelated little picture on the screen. It's not little, I expanded it, that's why it looks so pixelated. This is already from that first beta version of the product owner class that we were developing by then. It already had this thing, value period. So this is not really new. We've been saying this for 20, 10, 15, whatever years. So, but I think it's important to keep repeating the message. And it also shows that I'm very not creative about picking titles for my presentation, because I took the title from that statement we had already in our class in 2011. Now, value, I shared my definition of Scrum. We all know that Scrum has its roots in new product development and new product management. So what is then the relationship with product in all of this? Well, we call product, and I've put it between brackets or between quotes. Product is what we call the vehicle to deliver value. In order to bring value, you have to have some sort of vehicle to bring that. And that's what we call product. And what for me is really important about product in a context of Scrum specifically, I remember in early PSPO classes that I just referred to, people asking, yeah, but Gunther, what is a product? And it's very strange, actually. I've been looking up clear and concise definitions of a product to help people out, and I couldn't really find one. On top of the screen, you will see what the dictionary says, which is pretty boring. I've been looking into product management and whatever books for something I could use. I didn't find it. I wanted to have something, so I created something myself. And for me, there are two ways to look at a product, which is based on dictionary and so on. First of all, a product can be a certain good or a service. That's already have a broad idea about product. It can also be a bounded process, a combination of actions, a combination of processes, and the outcome of that could also be called a product. Now, regardless of what you choose, what for me is important about a product, it can be something physical, non-physical, a digital thing, it can be a digital product, it can be a service in general. You could also call it a value stream in a way. Potentially, what is for me important is it's only a product if it not only provides value, but if it provides value to the consumers of the product or the service. So a product or a service has in the end consumers, call them users, potentially buyers. I've chosen the term consumers, people consuming, using the product. It's, for me, in a context of Scrum, it's not a product if it doesn't provide value to the end users directly, immediately. And why do I say that? Because we all know that in an IT context, we could abuse the idea of product to call a lot of things that we do a product. But if it doesn't provide value to the end users, if it doesn't help providing value to end users, it's pointless in a way. Like in that statement of the Agile Manifesto, you want to provide a valuable product, valuable software to the end users of the product. And often we work in very complex landscapes, systems-wise, applications-wise, and so on. And you might have different components, technical components, sort of hidden in your landscape of your organization, of the organization that you work with, and a component somewhere hidden deep inside of the system architecture might be called a product officially, but for me in a Scrum context doesn't make sense. It should be the higher up thing, which is very important. So keep that in mind. It can be tangible, non-tangible, can be digital, can be physical, it can be a good, it can be something that you actually ship, it can be something that people have to download and install, it can be a digital service. But we should organize our Scrum around the product defined as or identified as providing value to end users and consumers. Now, there is a higher up message to this. There is a bigger picture to this for me. I've always said this is one element of what I call moving your Scrum downfield. And what I mean technically with moving your Scrum downfield, and again, I've been around for a while, at least, let's say. And I remember a long time ago, after stopping my exclusive work for Scrum.org around 2016, 2017, I felt like providing simple alternative to the overly large and complex transformations that people were trying to go through. Because I started noticing that a lot of those things that people call agile transformations or whatever were highly unsuccessful. In that sense, it was taking a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money, a lot of investments, and the results were at least relatively poor compared to all the work that people were putting into it. And I felt like you're making it way too big. So let's try to give you an alternative. And I've called it to reversify an organization. Reversify is an old English word, but it's about, for me, restoring harmony, almost restoring the poetry, the poetic, the level of poetry of an organization, going back to a harmonious thing. It was also a message of making your transformation small again. So, and reversification of an organization started for me with reimagining their Scrum. And I call it one product at a time, because it starts by knowing your product. All of those organizations were adopting Scrum, implementing Scrum, and not a single one of them, at least not the one that I've met, had been considering what is our product. Because product for me is the scope of your Scrum, because you've got a product owner, you've got a product backlog. You want to be able to produce increments of your product, releasable versions of your product, sprint by sprint by sprint. So not carefully considering what the product is not helpful. That you will end up with a lot of isolated Scrum teams within the organization with no overarching shared purpose for them, and so on. So reimagining your Scrum starts by knowing your product. Know what your vehicle of value is. And then make sure that you've got your Scrum teams organized, reformed in this case, so that you can optimally serve that product. Not just a component, not just something deeply hidden within the organization. No, get your view, your eyes on the outside world, on your customers, on your users via your product. And then optimize your Scrum teams and your Scrum zone, so that you can start releasing what I call tasty sashimi slices of that product. So this is for me the bigger picture. But the next step in what I call to reversify your organization, so reimagine your Scrum, reboot, reset your Scrum, restart, but do it not for the full organization, but one product at a time. That makes it small again. And then once you've made some steps in this process, everything is connected. By the way, it's not a sequential process. Start optimizing for value. That is important. And it starts by what I call arming for value, to arm for value. And let me explain how to arm for value. What do you mean with that, Gunther? That's really important. It means that ARM, it's an acronym. It starts by assuming value. In that sense, organizing, ordering, managing your product backlog for value. So have a product, know what your product is, make sure you have a backlog for the product, not just for all combinations of teams, not just some sort of strange, wild, all over the place compilation of work of a lot of sources. No, make sure that your backlog has a purpose, it's for your product, and then organize your product backlog items, manage them, create them, order them, prioritize them for value. That is important. So and make up your product backlog in such a way that you're assuming that you will be delivering value by doing the work as you've organized it on your product backlog. But it's assuming value because it's still not sort of leaving the company, let's say. In order to make sure that you can start knowing that you are delivering value, you have to actually release it as quickly as possible, and not just every 6 months or not just every year. So because as long as you don't release, you don't really know that you are delivering value. That's why I call it assume value on your product backlog, and then the release. You have to create output, which is in Scrum terms the increment. It's for the product, but you have to put it into the market. But even then, organizing your product backlog for value and releasing it, it's still one additional step required to know that you are actually delivering value. That means you have to measure. And that step from releasing to measuring is important, because it's a step from my core message, from volume to value. Because just using Scrum to release more and more often and faster and more features and whatever, that is still a volume-oriented way of thinking. It's focused on output, creating output. You want to make sure that your output has an impact with your users, with your customers, on the market, in the marketplace, where your competitive decision is also being defined as an organization. So make sure that you measure the outcome of your output. You have to create output, but there's a next step. Go for measuring the outcome, and do that again and again and again. All things in the world of Scrum happen iteratively, incrementally. So keep doing this. It's all about loops. But in a way, to arm for value means close the feedback loop with your users, your consumers, as quickly as possible. So organize for value internally, release your output, but don't focus just on the output. Don't focus on the amount of output. Focus on the impact of your output. And that is moving from output to outcome in the most simple way. So think about it. And when you have to assume value, when you have to think about organizing your product backlog for value, start often, which is for me a good start, ask yourself, whom are we delivering value for? Or whom are we delivering value to? Because that's the beauty of making value your core purpose of your Scrum. You have to think about, what do we mean with value? What is value for us? You can't just have some sort of uniquely, universally generic definition of value, because it's, again, like all things Scrum, you have to shape it yourself. It's about context. What is value in your context? But if you start with your product, you know that you're working for certain consumers of the product. So think about value for the consumers of your product, which is important. But you also are working for an organization or with an organization, and the organization is represented by the stakeholders in terms of Scrum, by the way. And the organization, in a way, is funding you. It's what I call the sponsors of your work. So you're producing a product, you've got consumers of the product, but you also have people sponsoring you, supporting you, giving you money, providing you with money, facilities to do this work. So value is for the consumers of the product, but there should also be value probably for the people sponsoring. That is important. And I think those are very straightforward. If you think about product and you would ask people, what do you mean with value? I think people would easily and quickly come up with those two aspects. What is often overlooked, but equally important, is also value. There should also be value for the people doing the work, the creators of the product. So you've got consumers of the product, you've got sponsors of the product, but you also have the creators of the product. So in that sense, adopting Scrum, introducing Scrum in the organization should in the end result in an increased delivery of value for consumers, for sponsors, and for creators, at least minimally. Because it makes no sense to have very happy consumers, but no gains for the organization. Or it doesn't make sense to have really happy consumers and a lot of gains and benefits for the organization and the sponsors, but having unhappy teams all the time. And that is often, or that is obviously connected to my personal thing of humanizing the workplace with Scrum. But even then, those are very straightforward. But I remember all of these years talking about value, and I sometimes had the question about, yeah, but what about this recipient of value, Gunther? And I'll go into that. And I remember a few years ago getting an email from somebody here in Europe, in Spain, asking for that. I was like, yeah, that's a good thing. You're absolutely right. And I think by the end of last year, so 2022, I was doing an opening keynote at an internal Agile event at a large bank in the Netherlands. And I was talking about this idea of value again, helping them also as a bank to move from volume to value. So not just doing more faster and so on, but making sure that you're doing the right thing and that you build in feedback mechanisms to confirm or invalidate that you are actually doing the right thing. And then afterwards, the lady came to me and asking that same question. And I was like, okay, this is now time to start talking about this, let's say, officially. So value for the consumers of product, for the sponsors, for the creators, but maybe what about value, not just for the organization and people within the organization and people closely connected to the organization, like consumers? What about value to society? What about value to the environment? What about our sense of societal responsibility as organizations? We might be really commercial organizations that doesn't relieve us or take away the idea that we're part of society, of humanity, of the planet, of the globe. So what about thinking of value in terms of value for society, the work that we're doing, the product that we are creating? What about the value that we bring to society or even the environment? And that is actually more important than ever. So let me dive into that last aspect a little bit. So the lady that approached me at that large Dutch bank was a lady called Marie-Hélène Pilon. I will show her name in a moment. She asked me, so I gathered in touch with Scrum.org, with the CEO of Scrum.org, a guy who's called Dave West. And they also had a conversation about it, because we think this is an important message even for Scrum Masters, to help think about delivering value for society, and in this case, for the environment. And I think it's really important because there's growing research and growing data around this. And, as an IT sector in total, we take up sort of the power consumption, or we have the power consumption of at least a sort of average country. So as an IT sector, we are actually using the amount of electricity and power of that is comparable to the amount of electricity power consumed by an average country. So we can have an impact as an IT sector, and we can all contribute to a more healthy planet, if you want. Yeah? And the entire footprint of the IT sector is huge, and it's growing, and we can work around that. Now, I've added a couple of links on the screen. I will share my presentation as a PDF via the organizers with all of you. You can click on the links. So Marie-Hélène Pilon had done a interview with Dave West about it. They published the result of it on the website of Scrum.org. I will share the link. Marie-Hélène also has a couple of workshop approaches to help teams think about value of our work for the IT sector. And it starts with simple things like the footprint of your applications, the amount of unused code, because it sits there somewhere, it's taking up power, overly too big sized databases with a lot of things that are not being used, but that take up power consumption. It's about addressing service and so on. I've also noticed that in a lot of tools like Azure, and even Amazon Web Services and so on, in their dashboards, they're building in tools to measure the impact on the environment. So it's really a growing thing. But as an IT sector, we can have a positive contribution. We can deliver a positive contribution to a more healthy world, which is really important. So if in the end, if you want to arm for value, assume value, start with thinking value, product backlog items, to whom do they bring value? To the consumers, to the sponsors, to the creators, and hopefully also to the environment. Then you want to think about, in the end, about measuring value. So you want to assume value, you want to release your increment, but you want to measure the impact. if you want to measure, you want to have some sort of metrics in place that will help you measure that. And in terms of measuring, are we delivering value to the consumers? You can think about user satisfaction, customer retention, visits, application usage or system product usage, and so on. Sponsors often think in terms of money, revenue, profits, financial benefits, I don't know, sales, market share, and so on. Creators, you want to measure value via metrics, let's call them like that, in terms of measuring the engagement of people. You've got indicators for that, like maybe the turnover of people, people leaving the company, long-term absenteeism, for instance, sickness of people, illness of people, people leaving the teams too often. And for the environment, you want to think about power consumption, carbon efficiency, and so on. So just metrics. But again, like if you start working with measurements and metrics, think about it. They are often turned into targets and then lose their meaning and lose their purpose anyhow. So think about that. Measurements are not targets, and don't treat them like targets. Because you know how we human beings are. We start lying again, we start cheating, we start gaming the metrics, and so on. Makes no sense. Measurements give you an indication of a situation. It's not about good or bad. It's about giving us information so that we can act, so that we can do something with it. So your assumption of value might be validated. It might be invalidated too. Both types of information, let's say, are extremely valuable. So if you turn that into a target, it will always look good. You know how that goes. And think about value you probably need multiple indicators, like just expressed. Value for your consumers, for your sponsors, and so on. And even then, value is hardly ever limited to one measurement only. And it might evolve over time.
Gunther, a quick check. We need to wrap up in like 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay, cool. Let me wrap up then with this thing. Make it tangible, or as tangible as possible for people. So what are potential indicators of value creation for those at least 4 types of, let's say, audience or recipients of value? Think in terms of customer satisfaction, in terms of market share, financial returns, engagement of people, but also power consumption. Yeah, and then for me, agility, or an agile way of working, but let's call it agility, should be supporting the possibility to create a high value. So let's call that current value, but you will repeatedly measure that. So agility supports that. Again, it's like the purpose of Scrum cannot be Scrum. The purpose of Scrum should be to enable you to deliver value. And that is important. But value is not, and then your agility can be measured by how often can you release, how focused are you with the sprint, do you actually create releasable increment sprint after sprint after sprint, or is there still work to be done after sprints, and so on. But agility should also help you not just deliver a lot of value to all those parties, but also discover new value. In that sense, very important new innovative features within your product, or even really new innovative products, new products. Not just agility should not just help you sustain and evolve your current products and your current feature sets, but also help you discover new value. So really important, and again, new value for those features. So think about Agile is not about Agile itself, it's not about the process, it's in the end about value. And that should help you move from a volume-oriented way of thinking towards a value-oriented way of thinking. But it will only happen once you close the feedback loop with your users. Yeah. So please think about it, and think about identifying, define this for your organization, your context. That is really important. And I believe this would be a very different way of working for a lot of organizations and companies. So think about value. So let me keep it at that. So value period. Scrum itself, the process is not the purpose of Scrum. Value is. So think about value, know your product to think about value, to assume value, to release it, measure it. And then once you start measuring, adapt for that, which is an important next step. So think about it, adapt for value, optimize for value, but start with value first. So thank you very much for being here, for listening in. I will share the PDF with all of you. There's a next step between after arm to arm for value. You will see that. Then turn your situation, your Scrum zone, your organization into what I call an armada of value. So arm for value, and then adapt based upon your findings. So call it an armada of value. Arm and adapt together. So bring that. That is for me the purpose and the spirit of Scrum. So thanks very much, Hashika and the team. Thank you for facilitating, helping out, and allowing me to share some crazy ideas with people.
Thank you, Gunther. That was insightful. I think ARM is gonna keep me armed from now. A lot of thought-provoking elements in there. Gunther, before we let you go, probably we'll take one quick question. There are multiple, but then I'll take at least one. Anuj asks, and he's from Bengaluru. He's asking, what's the future of Scrum in your perspective? So a quick answer.
So that's my call to action for people around the world. If our ambition is to keep Scrum relevant, we have to use it as a tool, not just to humanize the workplace, but also as a way to help people think about value. Are we doing the right thing? Not are we doing just more in a shorter time span? So we've got the future of Scrum in our own hands. Scrum is useful, is purposeful. Scrum has a future for me. But if we don't help organizations see Scrum as a tool to move from volume to value, it will become irrelevant. Something new might pop up, but it will probably look like Scrum again. But Scrum has a huge future if we make it happen. If we use it to help organizations move from the industrial way of thinking to the agile way of thinking. And not just use Scrum to make the industrial thinking faster or whatever. It's not going to work. It's not going to help. So the future of Scrum is in our own hands.
Thank you, Gunther. Thanks for being here this early in the morning. As always, we couldn't have been more grateful. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.